It's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker today, Andrew Mackin, who joins us from across the pond in Cork, Ireland. Andrew is CEO and founder of the Mackin Group. They operate Mackin Talent and Mackin Environmental Health and Safety. Andrew is a finalist in this year's Entrepreneur of the Year competition. Andrew holds a diploma in health and safety from University College Cork, a certificate in training and education from NUI Galway, and has over 20 years experience in the field of environmental health and safety. As CEO of Mackin, he has responsibility for the day-to-day operations of both organizations, Mackin EHS and Mackin Talent. A positive mindset and personal development are the key factors in Andy's life to help declutter the constant noise from around the world. Thank you for joining us. Please enjoy Andrew's keynote.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah, for that wonderful introduction. I think I'll have to get you to write more for me. Which is, yeah, I have to learn to say more nice things about myself, so I appreciate that really good introduction. So yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Mackin. As Deborah said, I'm the founder of the Mackin Group, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today to talk to you with this virtual summit, the 4th annual Maker Summit. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you. And you know, I think it's a really, really important topic when we look at the critical needs for the new collar workforce. There is a lot of scope for what we have to chat about today. So I hope what I share with you guys will resonate with you and open up some good discussions for our Q&A section in about 40 or 45 minutes time. Just to give you a little, just to give you a little bit about myself, a bit of background. I'm from Dundalk, and Irish, of course, just in case you haven't already noticed that. And I apologise in advance if I speak too fast. Dundalk is up in the northeast of the country, quite like Connecticut. It's a really kind of beautiful, understated part of the country. So if you ever get a chance to get up there and visit, if you're coming into Dublin and going to Belfast, you have to pass through it or drive around it. If you're coming from Belfast to Dublin, you have to pass through it or drive around it. So yeah, stick it on your list anyway if you're happy to be in Ireland. But it is a beautiful part of the country. I'm the eldest of 8 kids, so a good Irish Catholic family. No kid in her. And both parents, my father Roy and mother Rosalie, are both thankfully still with us and very healthy. I left school when I was 17, which would be the equivalent of your guys' high school. I had no formal qualification when I left. The 80s in Ireland was quite bleak, and my father hadn't got a full-time job, so I had to help out as much as I can. So I kind of did all sorts of jobs really, just to help out and pull my weight. As the eldest, you have to kind of do that. In February of 1985, I left Ireland. I went to the United Kingdom on a soccer trial. Didn't really work out. But this was probably my first real interaction with what I would call lifelong learning, in getting on that first rung of the ladder in terms of giving yourself some kind of qualification to create an opportunity for you. To go and help you get a job. So I actually applied for a position in a 5-star hotel and became a silver service waiter in the Grand Hotel in Torquay in Devon. And I stayed there until later that year in November, when I returned home and I joined the military, and I served for 21 years in the Irish Navy. During my time there, I was very fortunate. I got offered a position as an electrical artificer, and I qualified as an electrician in 1991, when I served for my remaining time in the Navy until my retirement in 2006 as an electrician. In addition to that, during my time there, I went back to college by night, again more learning, and did a diploma in health and safety, and I graduated in May of 2004. And like knowing that my 21 years were coming up for retirement, I wanted to see, you know, was that something that I'd like to do? So I set up a consultancy company, an environmental health safety consultancy in 2004, about a year and a half or so before I left. and I really loved it. Primarily, it was just to see would it be something that I would do when I retired, and I loved it. By the time my retirement came up in November of 2006, I had about 4 or 5 clients, and was really enjoying it. And thus then Mackin Consultancy was formed. And I was very fortunate again, like during my early years, I worked with some great companies along the line, and some great manufacturing and production companies. So it gave me a great insight into the different type of talent that was working in the industry, and how these roles were evolving with the ever-changing times that were in manufacturing. Moving forward 8 years, to 2014, I got an opportunity while working on a cross-the-pond project with one of the top tech companies in the world, based in Silicon Valley. An opportunity to set up a project resourcing company, and this gave me a good opportunity into the actual talent aspect of it. Fast forward today in 2020, it's fully transformed into a full service recruitment company that is Mackin Talent today. So when Deborah mentioned the Mackin Group, you've got an environmental health and safety on one side, Mackin EHS, and you've got Mackin Talent on the other side. And my reason for sharing this story is just to give you a little context in around what I perceive as my perspective on the talent in the manufacturing space, the lifelong learning aspect of it, and just the industry itself in general. Also, potential changes that can be looked at, and where I feel as somebody who has been in that space and would give a decent enough opinion on things that I think that need to be tackled in order for us to really kind of stem the hemorrhaging that I feel it is. It's definitely hemorrhaging the amount of jobs that are required to fulfill the roles for the new collar workforce for the future. I think having the background that I've had and given the insight that I've got within the industry and just the industry in general, it gives me good scope to discuss this with you here today. And also hopefully that it'll give some encouragement for any people that are in the system, whereby maybe they feel stuck in jobs they're doing within manufacturing at the moment, and they don't see where there's other potential opportunities that will maybe help them reskill or upskill, so they have an opportunity to do something else, or maybe an expansion of the existing role they're doing now, and they don't feel stuck. And that is the aspect of lifelong learning, and how we actually transition these guys or girls into positions that are really going to be impactful for them in their lives. And I think then, my general perspective in terms of looking at the industry as a whole, where you see how the industry has transformed over the last 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And really, when you compare back into the 60s and 70s, and I briefly look at that in my chat, and even go back to the early 1900s, the 20s and 30s, the transition within manufacturing in general around in the industry itself has been huge. But the speed at which the change is happening now is really critical, and we're not staying ahead of the curve in terms of meeting the demand for the highly skilled workers that we need. And there's a lot of positions that are opened, but again, that creates opportunities for improvement for everybody. So we'd also like to chat about then, just over the next 40 minutes, what I feel anyway is a very holistic look at the overall industry. And given my background, as I said, it does allow me to look at things like that, and we can look at it from a global trends perspective, like just in terms of what other countries in the world are doing, and primarily in Europe, because I would have a background right across Europe, and obviously being Irish, that certainly helps. And so it's not just like looking at it from a US perspective. So we will just branch across it, just to give you a kind of an understanding of the global picture from that regard. What I would say is, like, how current roles are transitioning into the new collar worker era is key for how we actually meet demands for the skill training that they need. We'll also look maybe at the apprentice scheme, how I think that this how it needs to adapt to be widely extended more, where bringing more talent into the fold to help kind of nullify that drain, and then discuss the differences in types of roles that companies are looking for the future. So not just now, what do we need like in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. And after that, if you had a nice kind of 40 minutes rest and you've tuned out for a while and you're tuning back in, we'd hopefully have a decent kind of discussion then in and around our Q&A. So just looking at things from a global perspective for the new collar worker. Governments in general are always looking at ways to impact properly, but it's increasingly putting an emphasis on the interplay of manufacturing, how it's innovation, the impact it's having on economic growth, and then the skills available. And it's very, very important that those four topics are looked at. In the 20th century, like technological innovation is being driven by, before it was driven by a small number of companies, research universities, dominant R&D facilities, but that's rapidly changing. In the new global context, it's being able to rapidly scale up emerging technologies for commercial use within manufacturing applications, and then successfully coordinate that right across the complex manufacturing systems that are in place now. Because technology is changing so fast, how you diffuse them into the system, how do we get the skilled workers to look at that, and the critical factors around just advanced manufacturing based industries in general. So policy around manufacturing is becoming more challenging all the time. And one of the main reasons that it's been challenged is because it's evolving at a rate of knots that we haven't seen. The global societal, economical, and technological landscape is changing ever constant. Megatrends such as globalization, climate change, growing middle class underline the fundamental challenges that we face in manufacturing today. And it's really with the emphasis to produce more with less. So that has its own demands. At the same time, manufacturing systems are becoming more complex. They're cutting across all types of sectors, all types of industries, and there's all sorts of new technologies being developed. And this is where I feel, having looked across the different industries and have worked in the areas, where there are huge opportunities for the educators, such as the technical colleges, the training colleges, the high schools, the trade schools, and organizations like Deborah and her team at Makerspace, to really have an impact on the training of the skilled workers that are needed. Government, local bodies, and federal bodies, they have a demand now as well, where they really need to be looking at how they're actually going to be filling so many positions. They have an impact and a contribution to make in the overall aspect of blue-collar workers and producing enough highly skilled workers for the jobs that are being created and for the positions that are currently there at the moment. If you look at the broader international concept, like there's recognition there that effective policies before weren't looking at the proper areas. There was no innovation in terms of understanding of what it could do, and it increasingly realized that R&D itself wasn't just the main driver for the manufacturing industry. That was not sufficient really to drive any kind of form of economic growth or achieve any kind of industrial competitiveness for the industry. It's a bigger problem than that. So there are policies required right across all sorts of functions to support the scale of emerging technologies, and that is work in progress. The commercialization of those technologies, the business and the technology adoption for small and medium-sized business to actually develop those and implement them into their business in a manufacturing skills, and developing those skills to meet those needs. So if you take a look back to the early 1900s in Germany, the early 20s in the UK, the early 30s in Ireland, just to use 3 countries in Europe, and that is where they first emphasised the need for further education, recognised as a proper learning tool and a learning objective for the jobs and apprenticeships opportunities at that time. And even if you roll that forward into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, as items were changing, policy and structure around that didn't change because they knew that lifelong learning was a key aspect for continuous improvement of the worker cycle. Countries recognised that there was a proper requirement for workers to have further training on an ongoing basis all the time as they follow through their work cycle. So it wasn't just a case that you took on somebody today and you left them there for what they needed and you moved on. It was a systematic approach looking at our new employee starts today. Just take an electrician as an example. What does he need over his lifetime? Like when he qualifies, what other training do we need? What systems are changing? Because technology has been evolving all the time. So really over the years, when you look at the mass changes that have happened in production and manufacturing, it's really only when the serious automation phase came in that the whole element of roles within manufacturing started to change and started to evolve. And since then, manufacturing jobs, they actually were starting to be created specifically to meet the changes, probably at a much slower rate. But I mean, at that time, there was probably no official roles or training within manufacturing per se to look after that kind of jobs. But those industries in the apprenticeship schemes really recognized that there was further lifelong learning required. And then over the years, obviously changing working environments have an impact on that as well. So this allows for new technology to improve the output. Whilst new technology will always impact on jobs, in the last 15 to 20 years, what we're seeing is that the technology advancements that we're making are creating huge opportunities as well. You probably had come to a critical mass point probably in the 60s, 70s, probably late 80s, whereby the technology advances at that time probably had a more serious impact on the amount of opportunities and probably cut away some of the more manual tasks. But what we're finding now is the lack of skills training that's around these new roles that have been created within the manufacturing industry. That there's a huge shortage and that we're not meeting demand. So there's opportunities there right across the board for all types of roles. And so like mass production, when it really kind of kicked in, that's really when the manufacturing jobs really started evolving. And they've been evolving right up to the current date, and they are going to be evolving long after we're gone, and probably at an even quicker rate. You look at the 60s and 70s when real technology advancements were made, and probably had the most impact in the industry, as I was saying there. That's where really the manufacturing roles really started to evolve into different roles. So you have to look at the education process, the training, what type of programs are being set up, are we getting people quickly enough to meet demand? And probably the answer to that is no. We're not meeting the demand, and that's not just in the US, that's not just in Connecticut, that's right across the board. I have a stat there, and I'll share it with you in a while, but I just wanted to cover this point in terms of like the vocational and educational colleges. Like right across Europe, they stated early on that the only way you were going to meet demand was to have that continuous training, that lifelong learning through your job cycle. That gone were the days where you just did your high school, your college, into workforce, and that was it. Your life learning was over. It's never over. And it doesn't have to be a degree program. It doesn't have to be a 4-year program. It doesn't have to be it could be a 6-week program. It could be a 12-week program. It could be a 12-month program. But it will give you, or give the individual, the opportunity to upskill or retrain and to move into an area where he knows, maybe he's in a company that he can see where there's opportunities, that then skill shortages are there, or there's demands in new roles not being met because there's not enough people coming through the system. And that's, you have to look at that, and that has to be encouraged at all levels. But that was, like very, very early on recognized. And I'm sure it's very, very similar in the US, like the Department of Labor and the individual state elements will always look at, like, what's the practical element for preparation? You have to make sure that manufacturing, commerce, and the industry in general are being looked after with a steady stream of good skilled talent. And you even look at the Government Workforce Council, the GWC, that Governor Lamont looked at. I mean, they set that program up in 2019, and it was with an element of, let's get these guys trained or retrained, get them into the ecosystem, and really have a good steady stream of pipeline of top talent trained or retrained to meet the ever-changing demands. And I know this is where a lot of the training organizations, this is where a lot of the state agencies and companies themselves within the industry have an impact to make, because those recommendations strategically are going to be made in January 2021. But all you guys have a huge impact in how to play into that, because I don't think it's an individual thing. Like, industry shouldn't be looking at just itself, trainers shouldn't be looking at it just itself, state shouldn't be, or federal shouldn't be just looking at itself. This is, I think, a collaborative effort is required to have a really good, solid, strategic plan going forward to meet the ever-changing demands in the industry and to meet the shortfall that's not being met at the moment. You look at countries like the UK, Germany, Austria, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Ireland, just to name a few. They viewed the apprentice program at that time like that it wasn't just for trades. And they looked across all aspects, right across manufacturing, in a general industry, as to see where they could have an impact. For example, in the early 1980s, Germany made a conscious decision to look at the skill shortages in their country and then try to funnel people through the educational process through lifelong learning, get these guys trained to meet that demand. And numerous countries across Europe have subsequently done that following that, but it proved very successful. The bonus was it not only did it create good opportunities for the personnel, it actually created new positions. It trained highly skilled people and made them more competitive. It gave them a competitive edge to demand a better salary and give them opportunities to move within their company or move outside of the company. So they were looking at where they actually could, like fill a need, not just on the trade side of things, but right across. I mean, they looked at engineering, they looked at metal fabrication, milling, tool making, just like from an industry, manufacturing industry perspective. They looked at all those industries and seeing where they shortage as well. And they funded people in, got them trained, and hopefully met the demand. And fast forward to today, Germany has gone right across the whole country in terms of roles. They look at healthcare, they look at finance, they look at technology. So it's a real easy, simple process to do. You take the apprenticeship program, which is there, you get a strategy around it, and you implement it across the board. But it has to be done through that lifelong learning. Adult colleges and adult college education, and the on-the-job training for these type of positions. It's a win-win for everybody, because at the end of the day, you get somebody who comes in out of high school or out of college. But a lot of the apprenticeship programs, I'll use an example later on, and they even use they get them in before they go to college. So they get their place in college, they employ them, and so on and so forth, and they look after it from them. So like, they looked at popular roles like chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, just to name a few, of where they would take them in, directly employ them. They would have their course, college dates, they'd go off and do that, and while they weren't in college, they would work in the factory. So then you have, at the end of their 3 or 4 year degree program, wherever it may be, a fully qualified person who knows the systems, who understands the plant, they know the way around. So the company has somebody now that they don't have to invest in after a graduate coming in, endless hours of retraining so they can understand what the process is. Countries like Ireland, United Kingdom, France, Italy, Spain, they've also done this now, and they've pushed their lifelong education programs across this apprentice model, where they're looking now at all industry and not just the general trades. And you have to do this if you're going to look at the new roles that have been created. If you want to meet the demand, you're going to have to look at areas that will actually allow you to train that skilled worker that is required for what we have at the moment, which is a shortage, but also to meet that demand like the 5 years or 10 years down the line. And I think strategically anyway, we need to be looking at 5 or 10 years down the line. I don't think we can be looking for a strategy program for now, because now is too late. Just like the way technology is evolving, it's next year, the year after, we need to be looking at. And like progressive countries like the US as well are continuously looking, for opportunities to see where the job roles for the future are, so that we can at least disseminate some kind of information down to the educators, so they can be more focused with their educational programs to train the workers for the future, that new collar worker that we're looking for. And that's like the likes of Makerspace are just taking a different look at it. Some of the challenges that I think that we have, and these are global challenges as well, not just in the US, that are impacting the manufacturing industry, has been they've been increased over the last 10 years, and that's mainly just down to the rapidly changing work environment that's there, and the advancing technology. Some of the key kind of challenges, if we break down a small bit, you look at the continuing aging of the workforce, and right across the globe, that kind of industrial kind of workforce is aging. And there is not enough young people coming in at the other end to bridge the gap, because manufacturing is probably seen as less sexy. But a lot of the roles that we're seeing, from looking at it from my talent hat, a lot of the roles we're seeing are roles that we'd be filling for the likes of Google or Facebook or companies like that, where they have tech roles. They're actually tech roles, because the technology has moved so fast. That now these roles are required within industry as well, and we've seen those jobs transition and change and evolve over the years. Lifestyle, consumption patterns, this all impacts on the demand for manufacturing, and that impacts then the change, and that impacts the demand for skilled workers. And so it's it's a huge challenge for the industry itself. And available workforce. I mean, that is one of the biggest things. You have to have available workforce. If you don't have the skilled workers, a lot of those jobs are not going to be filled. Changing manufacturing skills needs, that's a big one, because as we said, the technological evolution is evolving at a rate of knots within manufacturing, and not just manufacturing right across the board, but in our case for today, it's manufacturing. So there's huge requirements now in the workforce, to have like all sorts of training to be required. If you look at most roles now, you're looking for nearly a type of a hybrid role where the individual has more skills than just that general one thing that they're looking for. Another challenge then would be the growing interest in industrial and technological strategies. So, and that's a key one for me, because I think governments across both the high wage economies and the emerging markets, we're not looking at this from a strategic point of view. I had a brief discussion with somebody recently. Like, governments will give funding, and that's great, but I think that we need more from our state and federal in the US and governments in different countries around the world, other than just funding. It's easy to throw money at a pot from the pot and say, look, yeah, knock yourself out. But there has to be a joined up thinking, and the strategy has to be formulated from industry, from education, from government. And I think otherwise, if it isn't, it's going to fail, and we're not going to meet those demands. And if we want to maximize the economic benefits out of manufacturing, we have to have all the elements in the strategy correct to meet the demands. The increasing demands then around manufacturing itself. Cities are getting bigger, urban areas are getting bigger, infrastructure is required. That puts more demands on the industry. So that's constant. That's going to be a constant over the years, and that's not going to change. But it's going to be a prominent driver for new manufacturing requirements as we move down the road. You look then at increased efforts on reshoring to developed countries. So we've lost a lot of manufacturing overseas, and I think a lot of that now there'll be strategies around bringing that back. But the other side of that is, if we have X amount of jobs that are idle now, and we're bringing more manufacturing back to increase the amount of positions that are going to be looked for, you have to look at the skill shortage. You have to solve the elephant in the room, as they say. So, and I think that probably more to point was when this whole pandemic hit. If you remember, I think it was not just a US problem, but a global problem. After the first wave hit, PPE was running out within 5 or 6 weeks, and everybody had to start sourcing extra PPE from China. Whereas if you had a ready supply manufactured in your own country, that would have solved a lot of problems. So the challenges and the opportunities, there's both. Like I said, there are a lot of things that actually affect the critical need for the new collar workforce. A lot of challenges and items that are changing the way that manufacturing does business and produces services. That has an impact as well. Globalization. The world is a small place now, but the offshoring and outsourcing, bringing that kind of stuff back now to the country or to the respective countries, so that you have your demands met within your own country. Sustainability is another big one, like how factories run. Are they more energy efficient? Everybody's worried about carbon footprint and the impact it has on climate change and all that kind of stuff. So that's very important. The plant is running properly. Demographics, as I said, the global middle-aged class is growing. Aging manufacturing workforce is probably the single biggest one that's going to impact manufacturing really, really hard. Urbanization, infrastructure requirements, these all put demands. Threats of global stability, natural disasters, terrorism threats, global pandemics. We wouldn't have thought about this last year, but here we are now in 2020 with a global pandemic that's having a huge strain on the industry itself. And those kind of things do come up, maybe not so much on a global pandemic often, but we do have other situations. And then the production lifecycle. Technology is changing all the time, so that impacts on the actual manufacturing process itself. If you're evolving and you're not meeting demands, then that's going to put a strain on the industry itself. And then probably consumer habits, they're changing all the time. So we have to have faster technological adoption to try and help meet the demands of the increased demands that people are putting on it. And people are putting on the industry itself. And that is a key factor. So continuing aging of the workforce, just some key steps. The population is expected to reach 8.5 billion by 2030, huge. 9.7 billion by 2050. In the US alone, it's expected to reach 480 million by 2050. Europe is expected to decline by 15%, so that's going to have its own challenges in terms of having the workforce, the kind of look at the skill shortages. And why is it important? Because it impacts the lifestyle and consumption patterns for everybody. It has implications to manufacturing because that affects, if you have shortage of jobs, you're losing demand or losing production. Change in manufacturing skill needs, as I said, the technology is changing at a rate of knots that has never been seen before. And it has transformed the industry as it is, and it's going to continue to transform the industry. But we have to meet it with those skilled workers, or that's going to put a strain on it. Technology is changing both the type of worker that you're now looking at. So you're not looking for just somebody with a general, you're looking for a specialized person. So there's different types of skills that required for that. So we need to be making sure that we're training the right people coming through the system. And manufacturing requires workers to comply to multidisciplinary competencies. So they're looking at a cross-section of different work within their own task. So like mechanics, electronics, software knowledge is all key now as a part of the key skills that you should have, or the new kind of worker should have. New roles are forming all the time, right across the industry. So like proficiency in computerization, you have to have, and modeling is great, simulation tools, data analytics. These are all new roles that are filtering their way into the industry itself, and there's positions being created all the time. Cybersecurity, whoever thought that cybersecurity would be in manufacturing, but like a lot of the new processes and systems, they're so independent on each other, the security is key, so you can't have, you have to have some kind of element of knowledge around that. More generally, then you have innovation that will deliver, hopefully, the full benefits to society. But if we don't meet the technicians, the engineers and the managers that are able to embed all these new products and new systems into the overall systems within manufacturing, you're never going to get manufacturing to full-scale production. Jobs will demand workers to be equipped with hybrid abilities, I just touched on earlier on. So like more than one skill. So technical specializations coupled with a bit of business awareness. And what's extremely important to know is that we have that aging workforce coupled with a higher skill requirements now for what is needed to lead the next wave of skilled workers to meet the shortage. So if we don't meet that, we're going to be in serious trouble. And the impact in manufacturing, it's right across all sectors and all countries. Several reports have shown that there's going to be a shortage across the industrialized countries. It's 10 million of shortages. In the US, example, 2015, I think Deloitte did a report. They said there's going to be 3.5 million positions over the next decade. And if you anticipate, or they anticipate like 50%, 57% of those roles will remain unfilled. So that will just tell you there's 50% of roles of skilled workers that are required that are going to be unfilled, that we haven't even trained. So I mean, if we're talking about meeting demands of the industry, we have to, and I know I keep reiterating the point, but it's so important, we have to get the workers through lifelong learning into the system so they can contribute into the skilled workforce right across America and right across the globe. So there's a huge onus on the educators and the industry, and I'm making the point, like I said, it's a collaborative report to make sure there's enough workers retraining and there's enough workers training and coming in through the system so that we have a healthy, steady stream of highly qualified skilled workers keeping the pipeline full. Because if we don't, again, we're going to be in trouble. How do these jobs transition into the new collar workforce era? Well, like as I previously mentioned, there is going to be a plethora of roles. There is a plethora of roles, positions to be filled, and there's new roles being created all the time. What type of roles? I mean, you would have to have a crystal ball nearly. Manpower came up with a report in 2017. It's just one element. They said 165 new roles in manufacturing. Digital manufacturing was going to be created over the next decade. 165 roles over the next decade in digital manufacturing. And they said it'd be 3 new types of technician roles, probably 24 specialist roles, 84 professional roles, 30 engineering type of roles, 24 management roles. And that's just within the digital manufacturing and design era. So we're not 100% sure what the rest of the impacts are going to have. I mean, that's going to have an impact itself. And if you broaden that out across the broader talent ecosystem, the modern manufacturer is going to suffer big time unless it has that skill shortages. Technician roles, specialist roles, testers, engineers, architect designers, program managers, project managers, application developers, modelers, statisticians, scientists of community or practice managers, instructors, technical trainers, C-level officers, knowledge creators. That's just to name a few within that digital manufacturing area of roles that have been created and that wouldn't have been there maybe 20 years ago. And there's probably tons more across the manufacturing industry in general. That's just one element of it. So there is huge opportunities for the new collar worker, like huge opportunities. And it's how do we get that message across to them? Then that is the challenge, to have those workers trained to fill these positions. And while you have questions, or while you have organizations like Makerspace who do a magnificent job, they're only one cog in the wheel. And it's a big, big wheel. And the wheel keeps turning. So for us to have a steady stream of highly skilled trained workers coming through the workforce, so much has to happen. And the main thing I would address about this and about ongoing changes within manufacturing, it is linked to lifelong learning. We have to get these people into the system as early as possible to get on the road, to giving them a qualification that is going to help them get an opportunity within work. And like I said, I did that myself, but I wasn't in manufacturing. But it's just getting you on that first rung of the ladder that will give you an opportunity to say, okay, a bit of confidence now, I've got a qualification. What's the next thing? And that's the lifelong learning path. It's for your life. You should never just do 4 years or 10 years and that's it. I'm done. But the training and retraining and the upskilling of workers is required at a rate of knots to keep those numbers down, the vacancies down. And we have to be creating them all the time. And we have to be looking at what the new roles are so that we can actually dent it. And one key where we can do that is the apprenticeship program. And I know some companies have done that. But look at that right across industry. But for our case here today, in terms of manufacturing industry, let's look at that. So we take a standard tradesman. You're always going to have a need for a standard tradesman, like in manufacturing or in construction, plumber, carpenter, and so on and so forth. But you put the standard electrician now into industry, and it changes slightly because they have to adapt for their new environment, so that it's not just running cables for a light or a socket or any of the utilities that you have in the house. There's a little bit more. There's PLC controls, there's sensors, there's different type of breaker systems. So the training, they need to be trained to transition into those roles. Excuse me. Before they would have been just trained for that role in a general way, and then they'd go to get a job and do all the extra retraining. But I think we should be looking at that. We should really be splitting them in two, so you can focus directly on where the shortage is, and then funnel the trades guy in that direction. But not just in construction. I'm really kind of saying that every industry now should be looking at that model that Germany implemented in the 80s. And I know a lot of other companies have done that since, where they're looking at all their roles within their company. And countries are actually looking at roles across industry in general as how they can get the educators to funnel those workers through. There's going to be changes almost all the time in all areas of industry. So we have to meet that demand. And the key is the link to lifelong learning. The skill shortages and the educational system, the private training companies, enterprises, companies themselves, they all have a role to play to get that steady stream of talent coming through the system. If you look at the apprenticeship program, like I said, in Germany, traditional trades, that's fine. But let's look across the board. And companies themselves can do that. Whether it's Joe Bloggs down the street who has 200 people in employment, he's going to have vacancies and he's going to have skill shortages based on maybe technology that's coming into his area. So what's he doing to fill that gap? Or what are the training educators doing to fill those gaps? So like a good example, IBM implemented a program back in 2017. The CEO, Jeannie Robbitti, spoke of the importance of having vocational education supported, and they supported 6 high schools with combined traditional education methods and the best of the community colleges, and looked at mentoring for a real-world job experience. When they actually launched their program, they said they want to need digital needs across software, design, CAD programs, sensor, maintaining robots, repair of 3D printers, and data analytics. That's just some of the goals that they had. So they implemented their apprenticeship program in 2017. And since the launch, the program has grown double to what they thought it was going to grow. By the end of 2019, they had hired upward of 450 apprentices, and more than 90% of that 450 have graduated and have full-time jobs. Already in 2020, they've hired something like 100 additional apprenticeship positions, and they reckon they expect to hire thousands over the next several years. So that program is working for those. So it just shows you how easy it can be done if you really put your mind to it. The talent train, there's a general understanding, and it will continue to be, and if we move and continue to move at the pace we're moving, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. The National Association of Manufacturing predicts that companies that have upwards of 2 million job vacancies by the end of 2025. That's not that far away. It's literally around the corner, and that's what we need to be looking at. You have to remember that based on information provided by certain companies, they're fed into that statistic. So some companies didn't even report into that. So that 2 million might not necessarily be accurate, but it still implies there's huge shortages. Like 2 million shortages is just 2 million too many. And that's a lot of jobs. You couple on top of that then the Generation Z group, that's people born from 1986, they're saying that 65% of their job roles haven't even been created yet. So we have to be planning down the road to meet the demand. It's just so key. And like I can't emphasize enough, like the speed we are growing at, the speed we are moving at, in regards to these new jobs, we have to get ahead of the curve. And at the moment, we're behind the eight ball, and that's not the US problem, but that's a global problem. And like even some of the reports that Mackin Talent would have reviewed over the last few years, you have companies trying to fill positions that they just can't find candidates for. There's no skilled workforce there. So there's serious work needed to be done. Globally, I think the most recent report I read, there's over 10 million unfilled jobs in manufacturing alone. And whether that figure is 100% accurate or not, it's really irrelevant. Like whether it's 9 million or 11 million or 10 million, the number's increasing all the time. If we don't fill those positions and get our educators on board to train those guys that are needed to meet demands, the problem is just going to exacerbate and it's going to get worse. If you look at even just Connecticut on its own, in 2018 there was something like 13,500 positions free opened up in manufacturing. They reckon there's going to be 14% flat decline in growth in terms of filling positions. So that increases it to 15,500 positions. We look take into consideration the pandemic, while the manufacturing industry in general has got a little boost, some areas haven't, but once we start transitioning out of the pandemic, the hiring needs for those companies as they start ramping up properly and get back to full capacity is going to increase. So that 15,500 could open even more. And that's just in Connecticut. So like you multiply that amongst the rest of the states of the country. So we have a serious problem to look at in terms of filling that need. We have a serious problem in terms of getting the educators on board and really push that. But like those problems have to be solved. And like I said, it's a collaborative effort that's required. The most important one I think you have to look at, like the external education training and retraining of the skilled workers. So what are we doing now? How can we multiply that or triple that to get maximum impact? The majority of open positions within manufacturing is just because there's not enough skilled people trained. So we know already there is a skill shortage. We know already where they are. So we need to be training those people in those areas to fill those needs. The industry itself knows that jobs have to be filled. They know that a lot of the easier jobs, like the entry-level jobs, are easy enough to fill. But you have other jobs that need to be filled, roles such as mechanical manufacturing, technical, electrical, electronic technicians, quality control, engineers. Those roles are critical. And even more recently, engineers, they're finding that even harder to fill. So we need to have a really, really tough stance on where we're going and a good strategy. The toughest positions to fill, believe it or even not, tool makers, 63%. And the engineers are down the other end of the scale, 38%. General machinists, 31%. Technicians, electronic technicians, 27%. But there's still an element of that needs to be sorted and looked after. Retention companies need to look at the way they're retaining their talent, especially if they have highly skilled workers that are in short demand. Salaries, they're a part of it, but they're not a major part anymore. They're not a major driver. The working conditions are a huge player now for the younger worker. They want to make sure worker benefits are good, and they'll pretty much jump around different companies until they get something that actually suits them, benefit-wise, compensation-wise, and life-work balance-wise. So these are new areas that companies need to be looking at. And you just have to be more creative in how you look at your workers and how they actually work. So look at shift patterns, look at the proper tools for their tasks. Is there good health and safety within the industry, like looking after their needs that they feel valued? Companies should try and get and create more of a community within the company. Because if you make the worker feel more important, if you make them feel like they belong and that they have an input into the company, they become ambassadors for your company. They take a really proactive approach to applying themselves within your organization, and they tell people about you and tell people how good you are as an employer, and that brings more talent that you might need to fill the vacancies that you have in your organization. You've got to invest in their future. Companies should have proper structured learning in position and in place, so that they have and they are learning the proper skills and to become leaders of the future. So good communication skills, soft skills. It really helps them outside of the normal skills that they're doing for their job anyway. And these are the leaders of your company in the future. And that's really a no-brainer. Like, you've got to invest in your talent. So just to conclude, what does the future look like? I think we're going to have global shortages regardless over the next years. It's what we do to implement strategy policies in place that will actually impact that. But we have to entice the younger workers into the environment so that we have those new collar workers coming through. A number of things have to happen. Just to name a few, and I know because I'm running out of time, so I apologize if I've gone slightly over. Increase the education program to be delivered. So that has to get to the students earlier. Coming out of high school, even talk to them in high school about jobs in manufacturing. They might be sexy because everybody thinks tech now is the way to go, but there is really good jobs there. Increase awareness around the adoption of the apprenticeship program. That needs to be implemented more across the board, not just looking at trades, right across the board. It's a really effective way of getting people into the system. Students, just to help them around preparing their CVs and interviewing skills, because sometimes a lot of the younger workers sell themselves short. And it's important that they really understand how to present themselves forward. And like the state, both national and state level funding, get it into the educators early so they can really funnel the programs properly and make them acceptable and affordable for people. And I think that goes back to the governor's program that he's going to look at. So I hope that helps. I hope that kind of opens up some discussion for later on. I look forward to the Q&A, and I ran over slightly, but hopefully Deborah won't punish me too much. But thanks a million, and look forward to your questions in the Q&A.
Hi, Andy. Thank you. Thank you so
Hi,
much
Rebecca.
for your presentation. It's so enlightening. I kept scribbling down all sorts of messages that I wanted to ask you and talk about. But really, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. For everybody who's watching, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box or in the comments. We'll certainly try to get to them through the limited time we have for some Q&A right now. But we've already received a couple, Andy, and I know that you could probably just jump right in here. One that we received just a few minutes ago is from Mr. Sawyer, who says, I was a cell leader for an aerospace manufacturing company. We had a lot of young operators. I believe there is an issue with the amount of knowledge and training opportunities for them. What would you suggest that managers and supervisors do cross-train their young operators and retain them versus typically hopping jobs for more pay?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca, for having me back. I think that goes back to what I was saying in the presentation in terms of the right strategy, not necessarily even just collectively with all industries, but in that specific industry in aerospace that gentleman is talking about, sir. I think the company themselves have to look at what the training requirements are for those young operators. Again, look at what's going to be required down the road, because like I said, technology changes at a rate of not, it is changing at a rate of knots anyway. So if you want to retain the staff that you have there and to stop them from moving around to different jobs just because of pay, I think you have to identify the skill shortage in your company and then look at the training requirements that are needed to be put in place to actually kind of stem that from happening. I know that probably a very simplistic answer, but it really, the nuts and bolts are for any organization, there's always training requirements for their employees that they need to either excel or improve or move up the chain in the organization. So if the right training hasn't been identified, those guys are never going to get the opportunities to be better qualified to do other roles or get an opportunity to move up the ladder within the organization. So the key thing is just a proper kind of training and needs analysis within the organization, and then formulate the training around that to train those guys.
That's great. You talked about it several times throughout your presentation about the lifelong learning. How early do you think we should be engaging people to have that as almost like it's inbred in us, that it's a never stop? We go to school, we continue to learn, and then we graduate. And so we thought, oh, well, we've done it all. How do we start that cultural change to make people realize it's not just there's 12 years, 15, 24 years of education, and then I get my job?
Yeah, I think the earlier the better, and I think high school is a really good time to do it, and do it on a kind of like a community kind of effort basis where people come in and just do. Because I know certainly in Europe anyway, in our equivalent to high school, you would have different organizations come in and give different talks about their industry and what kind of jobs and positions and roles are available within that. Because as I said in the presentation, the tech industry is very sexy and everybody goes, yeah, I want to work in tech. But tech is pretty much in every single organization now, just in a different format. Just because you've got a PLC control system on the side of an automation tool doesn't mean it's not tech. It is probably as tech as somebody sitting on a computer programming. That guy's just in a manufacturing facility programming. And I think the message is lost on a lot of kids in terms of when you say tech, they just automatically assume Facebook, Google, Twitter, all these big fabulous companies, of course. But I mean, the type of roles that they're doing, they could be doing those in Nolan and Co down the road that has 400 employees programming computers to run the whole operation in the system. So I think the quicker you can get into to speak to the kids before they start formulating preconceived ideas of where the really nice jobs are, the better. And that can be done in a multitude of ways. Like I said, you go in and talk about aerospace. Maybe that's a good opportunity to go in and say, look, guys, you get so many opportunities. These are the types of roles and vacancies that are there and have been for the last while. So then in their head, they're kind of thinking, okay, well, if I don't get that job at Google, maybe I can be a programmer in this company. I mean, it's still the same job that they like to do. It's just in a different environment.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When we talk about this new collar, and we're focusing obviously here on manufacturing, but when we start taking a look at new collar jobs across the board, it's in all different industries, as you said, in the pharmacies and technicians and dental assistants and programmers. I mean, it's so wide and varied. I think technology is changing the way we're going to be thinking about forward. I have another question.
Oh yeah, shoot, go ahead. Sorry, I was just going to add to that point very quickly, Rebecca. I mean, and just to what you were saying, you kind of listed a number of different organizations there where tech now is readily right across all their jobs, so that's the key link for me to let the younger people know that there is opportunities. And like you'll have people, like I said in my presentation, who will go to college and they'll formulate a particular degree program that they want to go. But then you have those guys that fall out of the educational system just after high school and feel that there's not an opportunity for those. And maybe it's even getting Andy Mackin at 17 just into a facility as a general worker, but then give him a clear path for training and development to actually aspire into another role, because that kind of experience and knowledge creates confidence within the individual as well. So maybe he goes the longer route, than somebody else.
Yeah. And I think that kind of follows up with a great question we have here. Do you think that a company should allocate shop time, maybe as overtime, to train younger generations? Most management seems to be focused on financial goals versus education for operators.
The very, very short answer is yes, I do. And I think when you continue to focus on financials, you will lose the opportunity to create even more financials by not training your people. If you invest in training your people, they will produce more, and they're more efficient and they're more productive than they'll ever be by having the very, very basic training. And they'll always feel inadequate. They'll always feel that and of course, when you train people on a regular basis, Rebecca, you see them grow within different roles, and they start giving ideas, and they start kind of contributing more to the area that they're in, or the department that they're in, or the company that they're in. So I think it's a very short-sighted view to just say it's all about the financials. Look, we all want to make money. That's what business is about. But I think when you invest in people, what you get back down the road is 2 or 3 times as much.
Yeah, I totally agree. I took some notes here earlier, and you were talking about the 3 groups: the strategy of industry, government, and education. Again, I think we all are trying to encourage the industry to take more of a stand on training their employees. So how are we going to encourage industry to realize this is part of their strategy overall going forward?
Well, I think the first thing, if they can see that there's an issue with the shortage of highly skilled workers at this stage, then we're on a hiding to nothing. Because, like I said, it's easy for state and federal and governments across the world to put money in a pot to say, yeah, look, go train loads of people. And it's great to give that funding to the educators, and it's great to give that back to the younger people that can make it affordable for them to get it to training. But if industry don't do their part in terms of buying into the overall strategy, then I think we're on a hiding to nothing. I genuinely think it is a very, very collaborative approach. And I think industry is realizing that it has more of a role to play. And what that actual role is, I'm not entirely sure, but I think they definitely have to get involved in identifying roles earlier in terms of where the industry is going for the educators to train those people, to funnel them into those jobs. Because we're not looking to fill jobs now. We're looking to try and fill the jobs that are going to be created in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years time. So, like I said, like in my presentation, the likes of Makerspace, and they're only one cog in the wheel, and they do a fantastic job. But they're training people to try and get them out as fast as possible. But they need to be training people that are going to be qualified in a couple of years. That are going to be filling the jobs in 5 years time. And like I said, Generation Z, 67% of those jobs haven't even been created yet. So like it's a constant. The wheel is getting faster and faster, actually, all the time. But I think everybody has a role to play. So industry needs to get involved early, identify the roles, upskill. Really invest in upskilling their workers, because they see the technology changing within industry. So they'll know if there's a new piece of equipment coming in that's going to involve some training. Get the people trained before it comes. I know they can do the practical training when it arrives, but get the theory side of it done. So at least the worker knows it's coming, and it has a kind of a mental picture of what he needs to be doing, and then he can do the practical stuff when it arrives in site. And they're small little things that are great wins for a company.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I write down all these. The silver tsunami is what we're hit with right now, with all of those that are really in that retirement mode, but they need to transfer their knowledge to these up and coming. But when you're transferring knowledge to a piece of equipment that you don't even know how to work, it exactly. Goes back. Yeah. How are we going to be prepared for that transfer, even though pieces of that are going to be well beyond those that are in the industry now? So I think it's an interesting conversation right now. I had a couple other questions. I was making sure that everybody is getting some good information from this. It looks like we have just a couple minutes here. Andy, is there anything else that you would like to add? I know you had a lot in your presentation, and we were really excited to listen to it.
There was probably a lot in there. It was my first time doing one of these keynotes, so thanks very much for the opportunity. But I tried to get as much information as I could. Maybe I should have just shortened it down a small bit and delivered it over the next couple of years at a few of the summits. But no, I think, look, the key thing out of this, Rebecca, is that the importance of the strategy, and the strategy is collaborative, and it's right across all departments. So state has a part to play, educators have a part to play, and industry have a part to play. And the sooner they can come with a joined up thinking in terms of what the requirements are, what is really needed, and the strategy needs to be over the next 5 or 10 years, not 12 months or 2 years, because by the time that strategy is implemented, the technology will have changed and the roles will have changed, and we're now training new people for new things. So we have to be looking at down the road. So that's what I would take out of it.
Well, again, Andy, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And it looks like our time is up, and I'm going to move now. There's going to be a message for everyone from the team at MakerspaceCT, and then it's going to be followed by the next speaker, Sarah Bourvet. I'm sorry, I'm really hurting her name, from Fab Lab Hub. Can't say that 3 times fast. Thanks, Andy, so much.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Support for the New England Maker Summit provided by our innovation partner, Stanley Black & Decker. Additional sponsors include the Rutledge Family Foundation, Mastercam, MPH Engineering LLC, CBIA, ReadyCT, and Constep. Thank you for your support.